And so we are live for the first time on The View from the Clipper. Just me solo today, unfortunately. James is laid up a little bit ill, so best wishes to James. It also means that he missed quite a lot of the big news of what happened. He's been off work sick, so maybe didn't have to quite get up at the time that the news broke this morning, at least for us here in the UK, that Chris Paul was being cut from the LA Clippers. The initial reaction to that news was one of shock, to be honest, for me personally. But then you start to think of all the sort of permutations of what this means for, Chris as a person and as a player, what it means for the Clippers moving forward, particularly in the short term this season, but also, I guess, long term optics of what this move could do for the Clippers and the people on the Clippers staff and things like that. So I want to discuss all of that today, really, in the short amount of time that I have to be able to do this. We'll probably be around for about 15, 20 minutes to react to this news. If you are new around here, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. We do weekly podcasts usually on a Wednesday, so this is going to be in place of that. But if you are watching this wondering, will I still get it to my podcast apps at a later date? Yes, you will. It will still come out in all the usual places just a little bit later tonight. I'm off to the Liverpool game shortly, so it'll be after that. But looking forward to dissecting this news because, I mean, what a day again for the Clippers. Another day which just feels like the world is kind of closing in, or the walls are closing in for, if you're a Clippers fan, of which there have been so many from the inception of this franchise, really, from, whatever point it was that you started supporting the Clippers. For me, it was 2013, and actually Chris Paul was a huge part of me coming to support the Clippers and pick this as my franchise. I'd been a big basketball fan for so long and loved guys like Allen Iverson, who were like undersized point guards that not only could lay the table but could score on all three levels. That playmaking ability, that ability to handle the ball, was something that I was enamored by. And Chris Paul had that. He was probably not necessarily the closest thing to Allen Iverson in all kinds of prototypes or in anyone's mindset, really. But certainly at that time in the NBA 2013, Chris Paul was the coming force in terms of point guard play. So to be sat here today, having watched this man return to the team that I have since supported, partly because of, as I say, him being part of that inception and that origin story, but to then say that we're sat here today and he is still a Clipper by sort of contractual obligations, but he won't be on the team. And I presume that when the time comes where he can be traded, once that sort of deadline, that exception is able to has ended, then he will no longer be a Clipper, and that's kind of a crazy thing, like considering that just a couple of days or weeks ago we were talking about this being the retirement tour, this being the farewell tour for Chris Paul, and yet I think it's no more than like a couple of weeks later. We're sat here saying that farewell tour is over, at least in LA, or at least at the Clippers. There's still a chance he goes to the Lakers, which is the kind of thing I could imagine Chris Paul doing, because he's got that petty side in him, and he's got a streak where he doesn't mind rubbing people up the wrong way. And it sounds like, with all the information that's coming out of the sort of the different throws of this, so from Chris Paul's side and the Clippers side, we've heard Lou Williams talking on FanDuel TV. If you haven't been and seen that, I recommend that you do go and watch that, because Lou has obviously got some inside information with the work he continues to do with the Clippers, but I also imagine the relationships he has within the Clippers organization personally. And it seems that Chris was someone who held the team to account for how bad they've been this season. He openly expressed disappointment with teammates, with staff members, and with front office staff too. And I don't know what sort of timeline that followed, but from what Lou Williams was saying, it seems that he'd gone from expressing disappointment with the teammates and holding your teammates to account, which is what you do if you're part of any team sports setting, really. It's, locker room talk, really, at that stage. You will call out teammates, and teammates will argue, and teammates will fight, but ultimately it's because you all want one thing. It's all done in good faith, which is for the best of the team. If he did that with coaching staff, then I imagine it's because the coaching staff on the Clippers are all guys who are really like player first coaches, even as far up as the head coach, Ty Lue. It feels like he is a player first coach, someone who has that rapport with the players. And yet some of the information that's coming out from the Chris Paul side via Chris Haynes now, or at least it seems like it's coming out from the Chris Paul side via Chris Haynes, is that Chris Paul had been told he was having a negative impact on the team. He asked to arrange a meeting with Tyronn Lue to ask why he was being considered a negative side impact on the team. And I presume to ask Tyler himself whether he felt like he was being a negative impact on the team, because it seems like from all of this, like all Chris kind of wanted was an open dialogue, really. It didn't seem like he wanted to rub anyone up the wrong way or undermine anybody within the Clippers organization or undermine the Clippers in general. It seems like he just wanted to hold people to account and to improve what is going on with the Clippers right now, which is something that we can all get behind. I think it's part of the reason that Chris is a Clippers legend, and I'm sad that this will probably mean that his jersey doesn't hang in the rafters now. It felt like this was the perfect sort of redemption arc of all the things that have happened down the years with Chris Paul and his move to the Rockets, and fighting with the Clippers around that time, and secret tunnels in Staples Center and things like that. It felt like this was the perfect end to all of that, which would mean that his jersey would hang in the rafters, and hopefully alongside Blake Griffin, who was of course involved in lots of those stories as well. But unfortunately, much like Blake Griffin, it seems like L. Frank, or Lawrence Frank, has decided that the time is up on that now. And that was something else that Lou Williams spoke about. He referenced his own example. DeMarcus Cousins was also on that show, and it seemed like he was fired up and had his own personal experience of Lawrence Frank effectively ending his career, was the way that DeMarcus Cousins put it, by getting rid of him from the Clippers at that time, letting him walk away from the Clippers organization at a time when, I had my doubts about DeMarcus, of course, as we all did, but he just had a great playoffs with the Clippers. He'd contributed a lot in the playoffs when the Clippers were once again going through all their injuries and things. And then that summer, Lawrence Frank decided that DeMarcus Cousins was out. And this winter, we didn't even manage to make it to summer with Chris Paul. He decided that Chris Paul is out. So a very, very strange one, really, for us Clippers fans, seeing it end like this. A very sad one, to be honest, seeing it end like this. And to be honest, like from the basketball standpoint, like I'm not overly shocked. Like, and I don't think many people will be. You'd be lying if you thought that from the basketball standpoint this was something that wasn't coming for the Clippers and Chris Paul, really. And like just in the sense of like he wasn't playing very many minutes. There was a lot of DMP coaches' decisions. If that continued as in him being away from the team, but purely just not necessarily by proximity, but more by the fact that he wasn't in the rotation because he wasn't playing meaningful basketball for the Clippers, then you kind of wouldn't begrudge anybody for making that decision, no less head coach Tyronn Lue, because as much as there is criticism of Tyronn Lue, and I think that will only intensify with more of these kind of things coming to light and happening within the organization, because the optics of this are just bad, and we'll come on to talk a little bit more about the optics of this being bad. You wouldn't have begrudged Ty Lue for making that decision that Chris Paul shouldn't have been with the team. He's not played good defense. He's been an okay playmaker, but he's not been a very good scorer this season and hasn't contributed a whole lot else. He doesn't help the Clippers push the pace or anything along those lines. So in that sense, not a kind of great surprise from the basketball standpoint. But one of the things that Lou Williams and Chandler Parsons and DeMarcus Cousins were keen on emphasizing on that FanDuel TV slot. And, obviously they're ex-players. Ex-players are always going to think from that player first perspective in terms of like how this feels for a player to go through, really. They're always going to put the player first, so I can kind of understand that they would side with Chris Paul more. But like DeMarcus Cousins even said himself, he doesn't even like Chris Paul. I don't know what Lou Williams' personal relationship is like with Chris Paul, but Chris Paul is like, even though he's former head of the Players Association, all these things, he's not a well-liked guy because he does rub people up the wrong way, and because he talks, and Lou Williams referenced that, is that Chris Paul is a guy who is not afraid of running his mouth, really. So not like an overly popular guy, but someone who, when he's in your organization, can help you breed a winning culture, because he wants to contribute to winning basketball, because he wants to hold people to account. And so I am like shocked in some ways that it has come to this point. But I guess if I think about that Clippers locker room in general, and one of the big criticisms I've had of Ty Lue in particular this season is like it's all a bit too laid back, and that is the thing that I think is good when it's going well, because it's more likely that it won't like completely combust. And I know that doesn't seem like it's in keeping with the Clippers, but I would argue the Clippers issues around self-destruct and things like that have been more health related. They've not necessarily been, at least in recent years, since Ty Lue took over in particular during the Doc Rivers era, it was very different. The Clippers could easily combust from a mentality standpoint, even with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George on the team, as we saw in the bubble. But with Ty Lue, it felt like he helped that laid back mentality to stick around to the point where, like, the Clippers weren't throwing away big playoff leads necessarily. The Clippers have led in playoffs since, but and been, inches away in some cases, and or alley-oop dunks away in the case of Aaron Gordon and DeAndre Ayton from being able to make deeper playoff runs, or possibly even, go on to NBA finals and win championships and all those kinds of things. That's the thing that Tyronn Lue has been able to come in and steady the ship with, is to build a laid-back attitude that means when it's going well, great. When it's going badly, the laid-back attitude is not going to turn things around. And a guy like Chris Paul is someone who can help you do that, who can hold people to account. But if you've got laid-back stars like Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, I can easily see why that would rub them up the wrong way as well. So I think there'll be more that comes out about all of this. I'm sure that there will be, particularly from Chris Paul's side. I don't imagine that, as I mentioned with the character that he is going to stay silent in any of this, really. That would be not in keeping with who Chris Paul is as a person. So I imagine that we do hear more like things that come out as this all goes through, really. I mean, like, literally by the minute, it feels like we're getting new Chris Haynes things, talk about the team being stuck at Miami airport after another bad loss, and then learning in the middle of the night about Chris Paul's departure, because this came at 3 a.m. And where I will side with Chandler Parsons and Lou Williams and DeMarcus Cousins on this is that, like, this is no way to do someone who was going to probably have his jersey hung in the rafters, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like, when Chris Paul announced his retirement the other week, there were conversations from respected media analysts that spoke about him maybe being in, one of the greatest point guards of all time, being in that conversation. And that's always going to be relative to eras. I liked what Stan Van Gundy said on the Zach Lowe show recently, where he talked about, like, he stopped, like, cross-analyzing across eras, players. Chris Paul, in terms of this era of NBA basketball, or at least the 2010s era of basketball, will go down as one of the greatest point guards of that era, possibly the greatest in the 2010s, if you class Steph Curry as anything other than a point guard, at least in terms of that sort of playmaking point guard, someone who's going to, get you a double-double in terms of assists basically every game. Chris Paul was one of the greatest around in that sense. So to see his career end like this really is sad, and I hope he does get the opportunity to go and do this on another team. But really, like, I would quite like there to be some kind of way this can turn around for the Clippers, because one of the things that, like, I feel like I've arrived at now, and I've been thinking it for a little while, I've wanted there to be some organizational change. And to be honest, like, I had come on the record with View from the Clipper the other week and said that I think that it should probably be the time to get off coach Tyronn Lue, and his sort of laid back attitude and his approach towards the team and the way that that's been in recent times, and how that's not helping. Like, they need a coach, someone like a Jeff Van Gundy, who is literally there waiting in the wings, an assistant, to put that fire underneath the Clippers, because they are moving into an era now where, like, the laid-back stars like James Harden and Kawhi are probably going to be following Chris Paul out the door in not too in the not so distant future, I should say. So that idea of like, I'd never like to see coaches fired or see anyone lose their jobs over, like, anything to do with sports, especially because these are people's jobs, and sports don't feel all that important that people should be losing their jobs. But the thing that I guess people should lose their jobs for is poor performance, and the Clippers are performing poorly. Lawrence Frank has built a poor roster, has performed poorly in his job for, you could say, a couple of years now. Arguably, like, the Norman Powell trade, as much as I kind of agree with at the time, in the sense of, like, I don't know what a Norman Powell extension looks like. Norman Powell is only getting better as a basketball player. Like, I'm not privy to the information and the science and the data that shows you the sort of growth of Norman Powell, unless that didn't show that he was going to grow this much, and that really last year was just going to be an outlier and he wasn't going to go and be what he has been for Miami. Then I think it's negligent, to be honest, that he was traded away to Miami in the way that he was. And then you sign a guy like Bradley Beal to replace his output, and then suddenly he goes down with another injury issue, and you knew his injury issues were bad. You don't need science or data to tell you that Bradley Beal's injury issues are bad. So this has got Lawrence Frank's fingerprints all over it. Lou Williams said it himself. DeMarcus Cousins said that this is the sort of thing that Lawrence Frank has been guilty of in the past as well, particularly in the case of those two guys and in Blake Griffin's case too. This has got Lawrence Frank's fingerprints all over it, and I just wonder if the Clippers should arrive at a point now where Lawrence Frank is fired, where if they want to go in a different direction as a franchise, whoever comes in as head of basketball operations or the new GM or whatever gets to hire his own coach, because the optics of this are terrible. And if there's one thing that Steve Ballmer wants, he wants to look like he's running a franchise that looks like it knows what it's doing. And between the basketballs being played on the court this season and between this scenario with a legend of the Clippers now, someone who should have had their jersey retired, going out with a whimper and being told at 3 a.m. on a road trip in Atlanta, having to fly back home away from the team, back to his family with that news, and his tail between his legs effectively. No matter what he's done in the locker room, really, like as long as he's not like gone around slugging guys. And I'm not being funny. Draymond Green literally punched a teammate and was welcomed back into the team with open arms, was given an extension. Like, there are guys who are unlikable in locker rooms and who upset the balance at times, but they are crucial to winning. Draymond Green is crucial to any winning basketball that the Golden State Warriors play, even still to this point, just by virtue of his sort of mentality and what he brings in that sense. So really disappointing that the Clippers have yet again welcomed the eyes on them for all of the wrong reasons, really. Like, I've hated how much the Clippers have been part of the sort of general discussion among NBA analysts and in the sort of mainstream sports media this season, because of how badly they've played on the basketball court, and they've just opened themselves up to doing that even more for bad optics of waving a guy who should have had his jersey retired, doing it at 3 a.m. And there's just so many directions in which this is bad for the Clippers. Whatever you think about Chris Paul as a player in terms of what he contributes now, whatever you think about him as a person, this is terrible optically for the Clippers. And this malaise is only going to go on, I think, now, unfortunately, because the vibes were already bad coming into the season off the back of the Kawhi aspiration stuff. They got worse because of how bad the on-court play was. They feel like they're getting worse because James Harden is doing weird locker room interviews where it feels like he's basically calling out the fact that we're having to rely on rookies now rather than the vets. In terms of Kobe Sanders coming into the fold, and I guess Kobe Brown and Cam Christie and guys like that aren't rookies, but the younger guys who James, I guess, sees as being should be further down the roster, when those guys have done nothing to prove they should be further down the roster. It's actually the guys who've been the vets this season who've proven they should be further down the roster, really, who've let the Clippers down at every turn. And the best way that the Clippers fans can get any enjoyment out of this season, which, by the way, the farewell tour that Chris Paul was on could have given us at least some semblance of enjoyment out of this season. The only way for us to get enjoyment now, James, is to see these guys develop on the books, because we know there's not a long-term future with you. We know there's not a long-term future with Kawhi. We knew there's not a long-term future with any of those other guys around, because they're all into their late 30s. The future of the Clippers is Ivica Zubac, and it might be John Collins, and it might be Derek Jones Jr., and it might be Kobe Sanders and Kobe Brown and Cam Christie and Yannick Coden-Niederhauser. But the only way to find that out is to see them play basketball. And if there's no time, if there's any time that you can do that, then it's when you're a losing basketball team, and the Clippers are a losing basketball team. And to be honest, I completely expect that to go on, because the Clippers organization don't seem like a serious proposition at the moment. It seems like things are being done on emotion. This decision feels like it's been one that's done on emotion. Lou Williams referred to, in fact, I think it was DeMarcus Cousins referred to Lawrence Frank's little man syndrome, and I kind of feel like I have to side with that, in the sense that it just seems like this was a completely emotional decision that's been made without thinking of the wider consequences, without thinking of the way this looks for the Clippers. And it's just bad. It's just bad business, bad basketball, bad sportsmanship, just awful in all directions from the Clippers. So let's see where they go next. The Clippers will keep playing basketball. They're going to play this game in Atlanta tonight. Chris Paul's going to be away from the team. There's going to be lots of eyes on the Clippers. If there's any time to win a basketball game, just make sure it's now. Because, I mean, golly, if they don't, then